Hello, students. This is the very last of the notes for the resource unit. Again, we have some random things to talk about that are all fascinating, but let's see if we can connect them and be all clever. So this is recycling, the circular economy, and then the sustainable development goals, because why not try to have me pronounce that multiple times? I'm clicking you. Okay. So we're going to talk about trash, about waste. So here's just some interesting factoids for you about where our trash comes from. In the US, we're generally very bad about recycling, and so our trash comes from all different types of sources. The top being paper and paperboard, which is very easily recyclable. On the right, you see that different countries are better or worse at what they do with their trash. So countries like Mexico, or like Turkey, they just landfill all their trash. They pretty much throw it in a hole. Other countries are much better about, like Spain and Italy and Austria are better at composting things. Japan and Sweden get a lot of energy from their trash. So it's very different around the world what we do about our trash. So stick with the top, then we'll go to the bottom. So perspectives on waste. So what you can do with your trash are those four things on the last slide. Is you can landfill it, which is pretty much burying it. That I would say it's good in that it's cheap because you get a hole and you put trash in it, but it's really bad for the environment. It creates methane when the trash is breaking down anaerobically, and it also is just nasty. It spreads disease, all sorts of bad stuff. Incinerated. So if you you can burn your trash for energy, which is actually what we do a lot in Fairfax County. One negative for the incinerated trash is that you are burning trash. So of course that's going to create smells, air pollution. It could send toxic materials into the air, but at least you're getting energy out of it instead of the toxic fumes just coming out of a hole in the ground that you've dumped trash into. You can compost it, which means that you're burying your trash so that it turns back into dirt. So that's a good thing. Or recycling it, which is complicated, and we're going to talk about it a lot in this slide. You're basically turning it into something else. So one thing that's true about low-income countries that you don't see a lot in HICs are waste pickers. And so in a lot of LICs, people employ themselves by collecting waste and picking through this waste and trying to find things that can be recycled, resold, broken into parts to be sold, whatever could bring them an income. Even though these people are common across countries, I think the most famous are the Zabaleen, which are from Egypt, mostly in Cairo. And this was like Cairo's way of collecting trash, and they actually tried to get the city tried to manage their own trash pickup, and it actually went way worse than when the Zabaleen just came and picked up people's trash. And so they're making a comeback. But these people make very little money off of the scraps that they find and they sell, and the rates of disease are very, very high. And so their life expectancy is in the 30s, even though the rest of the country might be in the 50s. So a lot of the world's waste is created in cities. And so we talked way back the beginning of the year about mega cities and some of the struggles that they have. And one of them is trash pickup and what to do with their trash once they pick it up. So cities around the world generate a ton of trash per year, and it's expected to go from 1.3 billion tons to 2.2 billion tons in the next 7 years now. Yay. And added to that mass of trash is the fact that a lot of countries have no garbage collection system at all. And so about 40% of countries use open dumps, which just means people know where to dump their trash. It could be a riverbed, it could be a dugout hole, it could be the bad part of town, whatever it is, like they just throw trash and leave it there. And so this is a huge hazard for the environment because you're leaching toxins and creating air pollution. You're also spreading disease and pestilence. It's just a nasty situation. It's very, very difficult to pick up. This is something that I've learned a bit about from a friend of mine who worked at the World Bank, that they went from country to country trying to explain why they couldn't just let people keep open dumps and trying to come up with a solution of how to create a trash delivery system. And it's much, much more complicated than you would think if you actually think through how complicated it would be to get every single person in the country to know what to do with their trash and to have a responsible way of getting rid of that trash once you actually figure out how to collect it from everybody. We're not going to talk about composting much because it's complex and it's sciencey, and so we're going to focus on recycling because this is something that is systemic and that's going to lead us to talking about the circular economy. But recycling is any conversion of waste into something that can be reused. Right? So you're taking something that you use that you don't need anymore and making it into something else. So there's lots of benefits to recycling. Number one, you don't need to use new resources to create something else. So if you use a plastic bottle and throw it in the trash, that means that you now need to buy another plastic bottle. So that plastic had to come from oil, which had to be drilled out of the ground and processed and refined and all that stuff. Whereas if you recycle that bottle or reuse that bottle, which is even better, you don't need to buy that other bottle. And so there was no need for the company to have created it. So you cut down on the use of new materials. Less need for landfill space, so you don't need to dump that bottle anywhere. Like, it's just being reused, so it doesn't have to be trashed. It also takes less energy to recycle something than it is to create a new product. So not only do you not use virgin resources, unused resources, but you're also using less energy to make the resources that everyone needs. And then that's an extra bonus of you don't need to find somewhere to store this trash that doesn't need to be trash. So recycling is a good deal. I found this online, which I thought was fascinating. It's a little hard to see because I had to cut and paste, but it's basically what happens to our trash in Fairfax County. So where's my mouse? There it is. So the mouse goes to the curb or the bin. So you might take it to one of these sorting areas. It might be that companies collect your trash and sort it, and then it's sent to this recovery facility where they figure out what is actually trash and what is recyclable and what is reusable. If it is recyclable, it ends up in these bales up here. And so these bales are then sold to companies that are going to turn them into something else. Reusable plastic or recycled plastic is in a lot of interesting things, like park benches. Fleece jackets are made out of polyester, which can be recycled. More plastic bottles. Anything you can think of as plastic pretty much can be made from recycled plastic. Things that aren't recyclable are sent further along in the trash bin. They could end up in a landfill, which is outside the county, so it's shipped somewhere to be thrown into a hole, or to the Covanta plant. The Covanta plant is in Lorton, and so it takes trash from a bunch of different counties in Virginia and burns it for fuel. So they recover a lot of metals at this facility that were caught that weren't caught up here, and burning the rest creates power for 80,000 homes in Virginia. So again, incinerating your trash isn't perfect because you're still creating waste, so you're still creating toxins, but at least you're not dumping it in a hole. You're creating something from it. So we don't do too bad as a county. I wish we recycled more stuff, but especially for Americans, it's not too bad. International waste. More things you probably don't think of. That some of our garbage and our recycling actually goes beyond our borders to other countries. Actually, you're probably not that surprised that Americans send their trash overseas. But what's been interesting is that for the longest time, China was the largest buyer of American trash, or what they called foreign garbage. So a lot of our electronic waste, a lot of our recycling would go to China because their manufacturing economy could use these materials to manufacture new goods, and they had the factories needed to break down different materials, and their working conditions, their laws for working conditions and the containment of toxins were a lot worse than in the US. So they could recycle things in a way that the US couldn't because we had environmental laws to protect against that. And so it meant that we would send our things there knowing that they were going to be broken down in an irresponsible way. But, you know, if they were willing to do it, they were willing to do it. And so we were willing to sell it to them. This year, though, starting in January, China said we do not want foreign trash. And so a lot of American recycling businesses now don't know what to do with this stuff because they can't actually recycle it. All they were doing is collecting the recyclables. And so there's been a lot of reports of recycling companies just landfilling these recyclables because they don't know what to do with them and no one will buy them. And there's no factories here to deal with them. So that's kind of an interesting change here as countries develop and want to get away from their environmentally destructive practices. Like, we now don't know what to do with our stuff that we used to be able to sell to China. A lot of this was electronic waste, like I mentioned before. E-waste is becoming a larger and larger problem as we create more and more electronics. There are precious metals and very expensive pieces that are in these electronics, but they're very hard to get out of them. So you have to break them down, smelt them, and try to burn away what is waste and collect what is not wasteful. So you want to collect copper, collect gold. So it's a very nasty process and very dangerous to health and the environment. And so, as you can imagine, they're usually sent to low-income countries, and that's where this work is done. We create about 50 million tons of e-waste. It's been increasing. Well, it was 50 million in 2012, and they estimate that's gone up to somewhere in the 60 to 70 million ton range. So you might be thinking to yourself, Mr. Vandenberg, why are you ruining recycling for me? I thought I was doing a good thing by recycling. And you are. But there's only so far we can get by just recycling some plastic bottles and some paper. That's not going to save the world from how many resources we're using. So the newest idea, or the best idea for how to solve this, is called the circular economy. And I'm going to come back to this diagram because it's confusing for now, but it'll make sense, maybe, if I do my job. So what's the circular economy? It's this. So you can write down that definition if you like definitions. I kind of broke it down into what it means to me, hoping it'll make sense. But basically, it's the idea that everything that is made, anything manufactured, should be able to be reused or recycled or broken down into its component parts. And to make that true, you need all political, economic systems, and every person to be willing to work together to make sure that there's no waste in the system. All right, so if we start making things in a circular way and buy into the circular economy idea, then in the future, there would be no reason to get new materials. We would just be constantly reusing and remanufacturing things and fixing things instead of making new goods, which to the ears of your average American sounds bizarre because we like consuming and throwing out things. But in a lot of places in the world, like, this is more in line with how things are done. And we're going to talk about that in class. Like, how realistic is this? Like I was just mentioning, this is super important to get the consumer on board with. So if companies aren't going to make things in this fashion, if people aren't going to buy them in that way. So it means that we would need to get used to renting things instead of buying things. Leasing vehicles and returning them to the manufacturer instead of buying them. Buying refurbished goods, buying things that we know aren't new, buying things that we know were fixed, buying things that we feel like keeping for a long time. So we seem to like going through pairs of shoes and outfits and phones and getting the newest thing, and we need to break that habit if this is going to work. And also being willing to sort out what you are trashing and delivering it back to where you got it from. So you can't just take a good and be like, it's broken, it's not working anymore, and just throw it in the trash can. You have to be like, it's not working anymore. Now I have to drive it to Best Buy so that they can take it and fix it. And then I will buy a refurbished one because someone else turned in their broken one earlier and it was fixed. So it would be very different for us. So that's where this comes from. For the consumer, like after things are made, we would have to try to reuse things a lot or return things to the retailer to be fixed and sold, to send it back to the distributor. So like have it broken down into pieces so it can be made into something else, or recycling that so that it can be melted down and go back into the production cycle. So without the consumer being a part of this, it just goes in the trash. We would have to be the ones that feed it back into the system to make it circular. And these groups would have to make things so that we could return it to them. So a case study. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation is working with fashion designers to try to make fashion circular. And this is very new. It's just in the last year or so they've been trying to do this. And what they want is for textile manufacturers and clothing lines to make clothes from renewable materials that are going to last and that can be recycled to make new textiles in the future. And the reason that they're focusing on clothing is that clothing is a super nasty industry for people and for the environment. So the clothing industry has very poor working conditions for the people making textiles and clothes and shoes. A lot of toxic chemicals go into the process, especially things like tanning, making leather, release a lot of toxins into the environment. We waste a lot of goods through this idea of fast fashion, that there's like every season there's something else to buy and something new to wear. So there's a lot of wastefulness there. And another problem with the fashion industry is that when we donate clothes, a lot of times that is just being sent to low-income countries where people aren't able to fashion their own clothes and create their own clothing industry because they're just wearing old American t-shirts that we don't want anymore. So throughout the system, there's waste and there's toxic chemicals and there's poor conditions for people. And so they're trying to make this a healthier system. Some companies that are involved already are Gap, H&M, Nike, and some other companies you've probably never heard of that are trying to test this out and see if consumers would buy into this. Because again, if consumers aren't going to buy H&M's renewable materials made from recycled textiles, then why would H&M do that? They would just be making things that no one would buy. So again, consumers are a huge part of this circular economy idea. And I want you to think about this a lot because this is what I want to focus on in class. Last thing, that kind of doesn't fit, but oh well, I'm going to do it anyways. The SDGs, because I'm a cool kid, Sustainable Development Goals. These are things that were created in 2015, 17 goals that we will reach by 2030, so says the UN. So this journey with the development goals started in 2000, where the UN created 8 Millennium Development Goals. So they thought, 2000, it's a big round number. We should have goals. We should change things. We should have New Year's resolutions for the next 15 years of what we want to see done in the world. So they created these 8 goals to fight world problems that were around. So things like eradicating poverty and ensuring universal education and cleaning up the environment and providing maternal care and all sorts of really good stuff. Unfortunately, most of the goals weren't met. Goal 1 was met, to cut in half the number of people that were in extreme poverty, so that was good. But a lot of the goals weren't, like some subtopics were met, but the goals themselves weren't really met. So we got to 2015, the MDGs didn't really pan out. And so the UN decided maybe we need more goals. So they created 17 new goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, that are supposed to be things that will be solved by 2030. So here they are. These are the old ones, the Millennium Development Goals. Why is my mouse being so dumb? And then now we have the Sustainable Development Goals. So 17 things that we're gonna fix. You'll notice that a lot of the environmental ones were broken up into bits. So you have responsible consumption, climate action, life below water, life on land, sustainable cities, that affordable and clean energy, clean water, which are all things that are kind of environmentally. So that was really the one that was split into the most parts. Some of these are very similar, like quality education, gender equality, that are similar to some of the other goals. So these goals, they're not law. They're not some international treaty that countries have to follow. They are vague goals that the UN has to try to inspire people to action, to chart progress and how we're doing with certain aspects of the planet, and to guide interventions and aid programs and government programs to try to reach these goals that are like really important worldwide goals that the UN would like to see done. But there's no punishment mechanism. It's not like if you don't follow the goals, your country gets punished. There's no bonuses. There's no cash prizes. There's no trophies given out for reaching the SDGs. It's really just to inspire and guide practice. A lot of these goals also have sub-targets. So they're things that are more nitty-gritty targets for exactly what they would like done. This helps them kind of rank how well they're doing with goals. So something like life on land, what does that mean? Like, what exactly are we supposed to be doing with the life on land? So they have 12 sub-targets of things that are specific, targeted interventions that they want to see done around the world. So they want to stop wildlife trafficking. They want to improve land development so it's more sustainable and protects habitats. They want to prevent invasive species from eradicating other species. So if you look within all of these big goals, there are very focused targets that they have. And so what I think you need to do as a IB geography student who's going to be tested on this stuff is just be prepared to take data from these sub-targets or these goals and try to interpret, like, how are we doing generally with this topic? Are we generally protecting life on land? If I give you stats on invasive species and wildlife trafficking, or if I give you statistics on water usage around the world and access to clean water, how are we doing on our clean water goal? Could we be doing better? So it's very statistical. I imagine that's what they're gonna give you on the exam. I'm not gonna spend a ton of time in class on the SDGs, but they are very interesting to poke around online and see some of the ways the UN uses them to inspire people and to reach goals that are worthwhile. So there we go, the darkness of we have all the information from this unit. It's been fun. See you in class.